All right, so we've got the recording going. So welcome to session 3 of the Intro to Coding, the Bootcamp Prep for Code Platoon. It is about 6:15 Central Time on August 18th, and we're going to hit session 3. So we're going to dive a little bit deeper into built-in methods, and then we're going to get to the challenges. So I won't have as much talking tonight as I did the last couple of nights, and this will be more indicative of what the rest of the class is going to be like. After our discussion last night, what I'll probably do is tackle a challenge for the class, and then we'll select the next challenge, go into breakout groups, come back, go over that, look at a third challenge and decide if you want me to lead that through the class, or if you want to go do another breakout challenge in small groups. And we'll just kind of repeat that cycle for however many challenges we can get through each night going forward. Here, all right. So, and we've already talked a little bit about built-in methods. A method is basically a function that is bound to any given data type, string, number, array, object. Methods tend to always perform actions on or using the value being stored in that data type. The action performed may either mutate the data in place without returning a new value, or it cannot mutate the existing value, but return a brand new value, which you would need to store in a variable yourself. And so we're going to talk a little bit about basically mutating in place and what that concept looks like, and how there isn't a specific, like MDM will call it out and say like, hey, it won't say like it mutates it in place. It'll say this creates a new value, or this modifies the existing value. But it's definitely good to know what each built-in method that you do, if it is going to be mutating in place or not, and because it impacts how you treat that data going forward. And I'll show you some different examples of that. All right, so a few built-in examples. So string is concat, includes, trim. Concat is short for concatenate. This is, I mean, I won't call it not useful, but it is also something that's easily done without using a built-in, right? So we were using string literals. We can just use a plus sign to concatenate a string, but you can also basically use a built-in method. So we can say, let string 1 equal hello, and then we can say console.log str1.concat. Right, so the string appends to the end of the string, returns a string that contains a concatenation of 2 or more strings. And here we can say world. Right, and then when we run it in our terminal, we're going to update MTM. Okay, so there we go. There is that. So it's the same thing as doing this, right? Or actually, I don't need to do that. But you can see there's multiple ways to get the same result. We can also do an includes. Check strings contains another string inside it. So we could do something like this. Right, and that's true. Right, so it is case sensitive, and we talked about like using another built-in. So if I wasn't worried about case and I just want to know if the word's there, instead of having to check for something like quick quick, 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 all the different iterations of that. I could do something like this where I say string.to, and also, so we haven't discussed this yet, but also you can chain built-in functions together or built-in methods together. So I can say dot to uppercase dot includes quick, right? And that's true, because if I take this off, right, I'm getting the quick brown fox jumped over the lazy developer, all in uppercase. And so it is important to do these in the correct order. I believe this should give me false. To uppercase is not a fun. Okay, so yeah, I can't even tack it on to the end of the includes. But there is, you do have to pay attention to what order you assemble your attached methods here. Let's see here. I'm not sure off the top of my head if we do let's see here. So, if this mutates in place or not, if to uppercase does, right? So notice how when I do this, right, to uppercase, I get that, but then when I come back to string 2, it is still in standard sentence case, right? And so this it doesn't mutate in place, it does not change what string 2 is equal to, it only changes what I'm sending to the console, right? And so this is not permanently altered. What I would have to do is say let str3 equal str2 dot to, oops. And then run it against string 3. So now string 3 is a copy of string 2 set to uppercase, and that value is saved. But same thing, if I come down here and do this again, right, string 2 is still the same. It's not being mutated in place. Now there are, and we'll run across methods where when we were playing with the arrays the other day and we were adding elements or removing elements, that is actually changing the value of that array permanently, and it is mutated in place. So trim chops off any white space characters at the beginning or ending of a string. This one's super useful when you're looking to parse data. All right, so notice how it doesn't get rid of any of the spaces in the center, but it trimmed it off the beginning and the end. All right, but notice that it did not mutate what this is equal to. All right, numbers, we talked about to fixed, and just like we were parsing a float or parsing an integer, you can set an integer to a string version of the same number, right? So we can come back over here. right? And so notice how that's a string. And it does not mutate it in place. When we just look at num1, even after performing this action, it still comes through gold, which tells me that it's a number, right? And so we could do this. Right, so that's a string. Right, and a number. And to fixed we've already dealt with, so we can use that and see it would return back a new string. And then if we needed to, we could then parse a float or parse an integer, use number, or use the plus sign to massage it back to something that we can manipulate mathematically instead of treating it like a string. All right, so any questions about string or number built-ins? Okay, so the next section is arrays, right? And there's plenty of different built-ins here for arrays. And you will use these quite a bit in your challenges. And this is where we're going to start getting into mutating things in place, right? So if we take a look, I'm just going to grab this. Let's do this. So if I take an array and let's say let array 1 all right, and so now if I do console.log R1, right, there is my entire array. Remember, we can access the individual elements in an array by giving it an index value, right? So now I'm just getting Apple. And if I want to add something to an array to the end, so we can do R1 dot push, and we will push Tesla in there, right? And then we'll print this out a second time, right? So notice how this has been changed, right? So once this is done, the computer will look at this, and every time it reads or goes back to array 1, this has been permanently mutated. It's not creating a copy of it. It is changing array 1. Forever we'll have Tesla added after this line. Everything before it will not have it. And same thing here. So if we do pop, we can say equal to this. And if we come down here and we say R1 dot pop, and we console.log again, R1, right? So now we're right back to where we were. Right, so remove, oh, sorry. I'm removing, so I don't need to provide it a value. Take a look at this again. All right, we notice that apple has been removed, and going forward in the rest of the program, every time we reference back to array 1, apple would no longer be included in there. All right, so now it's back in there. Okay, and so here's where we start to step it up here a little bit. So when we get into slice and splice, don't worry about getting these two mixed up. You will start to run into situations where you know you need one of them and you're not quite sure which one you need. So all of these before, we're just adding values, removing values, one at a time. Once we hit slice and splice, we start to gain a little bit more control, and we can start removing elements or adding elements optionally at various parts of the array. And so if we look at slice, and let's go ahead and pull it up on MDN, and we'll see some examples. All right, so on MDM, we have animals: ant, bison, camel, duck, elephant. All right, if we console.log animals.slice 2, what happens is at the second index value, we take the rest of the array, right? So 0, 1, 2. And so we cut there, and then we take everything after that, right? So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then we also have the ability to add an optional value at the end that will tell us when we're going to stop counting. So, and the first value is inclusive. So notice how when we put 2 in here, 0, 1, 2, make this a little less blinding for everyone. We start at the second index. So that is included in our output. And then, but when we hit 4, so notice we start 0, 1, 2, 3, and then 4 is exclusive, right? So if I wanted everything, right? So if I change this to 2, 5, then I would get camel, duck, elephant. But at 2, 4, even though this is at the 4th index position, that 4 is exclusive and it's not included. However, the leading number is inclusive and it does get included. We talked about this a little bit when, actually, I'm sorry, we haven't talked about this in class yet. But when you are using index positions, you can also use negative numbers. And what that will do is it will always start counting from the back. And I can show you why that is useful. And then if you don't give it any value, you're going to grab the whole thing. Now, let's take a look here. So I'm going to do this. So in fact, just to keep it consistent, let's go ahead and do this. Okay, so we can do console.log animals.slice and give it a 2. Right, and so we get camel, duck, and elephant. 0, 1, 2. right? So 5 elements in here total, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. And this would be, let's see here. Right, and so if we look at console.log animals, slice 2 and 4, right? So we get camel, duck, we don't get bison, or I'm sorry, we don't get elephant. And now this will stay the same. So even if I come up here, right, and let's say, well, actually, I'm sorry. So let's do this here once real quick too. Let's see if slice mutates in place. Right. So it looks like slice does not mutate in place, because when I console.log animals, I still get my full array, right? And again, it doesn't specifically say, it doesn't mutate in place or use that term. It says the slice method returns a shallow copy of a portion of an array, right? So we know we're making a copy of it. So if we're making a copy of something, we're not actually modifying the original. All right. And so next is, we'll just skip to the negative number here. Right. And so if I say console.log, and I want everything except for the last element here, right? So I can say 1, 4. And what I'm expecting to see is something like this. Whoops, console.log 1, 4 isn't going to get me very far. Let's go ahead and do animals slice 1 to 4. Right, so there's bison, camel, duck. And so again, I counted wrong. I counted like a human. So let's do 0 to 4. There's ant, bison, camel, duck. Now, the other way to do that is to do console.log animals 0 and -1. Oops. Yeah, slice. Right, notice these are the same. Now, where things change is when I do something like this. Right, so now I'm still grabbing 0 through 4 here, 0, 1, 2, 3. I'm sorry, the 4 is exclusive. But if things get added or removed from my array, by adding a negative value, I'm actually going till the end and counting backwards. So this will give me everything except the last value. As long as my array is 5 elements long, this will give me everything except for the last value, regardless of the length of my array. And which is, again, super helpful here. And it's also, if we go the other direction, so if I delete the last 2 elements here, right? So the, sorry, 2 through 4, it gives me the same thing. So if I was asking 0 through 3, all right. What am I doing here? Why is this not blowing up when I thought it would? I guess yeah, so I guess slice doesn't throw an error. It just stops giving you anything with it. But if you're not visibly seeing that, but we can see that it's still modifying here, even as I go shorter. Where this is useful is that if this changes and you don't know about it, like let's say that I've got a push somewhere up here that adds a bunch of animals and I don't see this variable right here without looking at it, or a lot of times if we're pulling data from a database and we can't see it, this doesn't throw an error. And so we may look at this and be like, this is okay. But in actuality, it's not okay. We could be missing additional data, right? So if I come back in here and add in elephant, tiger, right? So now I think this is okay, but because this is what I was expecting when I look at this, but if there was a push somewhere or something added in there, it can cause problems down the road. Splice changes the contents of an array by removing or replacing existing elements or adding new elements, right? And so this, I believe, just from reading this is going to tell me that we are going to mutate things in place here. And to the question, what would be the benefit of using slice if we aren't giving it a value at the point? So there is something to be said about not, and so when you get into what is called functional programming, some programming languages won't ever let you mutate your original data. Everything becomes a copy of everything else. And so let's say we have a function that goes in and specifically adds 5 more animals to whatever array you give it. And so it doesn't matter if you give it an empty array, if you give it a like 20 animals, it's going to give you 5 more animals on top of it. And so if you splice, or you're going to modify that data. When you do push, you're modifying the original array. When you do slice, so I can do this. I can say const copy of animals equals animals dot slice. Fix that up here. Right, and right, and so, and sorry, I just totally put that in the wrong one. There we go. All right, so now I have a copy, and because I added copy in here, and I'm just concatenating it. I can do this. This will work better. All right, there we go. So there is my copy. And now I can take this and I can start modifying my copy instead of modifying the original. And then for some reason, if I need to compare that copy back to the original, like let's say that the challenge is that you've got an array of 20 objects and we're going to add in 5 objects at random, and you have to then compare and figure out what the 5 additional objects that were added. So at that point, like using a slice and making a copy of it allows you to basically have the original unedited so that you can compare against it. All right, and let's see here. Okay, so down to splice, and so let's take a look at mdn.splice. All right, and so a splice, a method changes the contents of an array by removing or replacing existing elements and or adding new elements in place. To access this part of the array without modifying it, C slice, right? So if you don't want to change the original array, C slice. If you want to change the original array, mutate it in place, we're going to use splice. And splice is pretty powerful because not only can you remove elements, you can also add additional elements. So let's go ahead and take a look at this. So if we say, I think we were using months for this one, so let me just grab this. All right, so if we say months dot splice, right, and so the zero base location in the array from which to start removing elements, removes elements from an array, and if necessary, inserts new elements in their place, returning the deleted elements. So let's go ahead and play with this here a little bit. So if I just give this a 1, and if I spell months right, and then we console.log months, right? So we can see that I basically started at the first index position and got rid of everything after. And so if I do 1, 2, right, I've got January through June. And what that did was I started after January at the 1, I removed the next 2 elements and then kept going, right? And so if I do 1, 1, what I would hope to see is January, April, June, right? January, April, June. And if I start here at 0, right? So I've got March, April, June, right? So I just basically started at the 0, removed 1. If I take out 2, right? So there's my April, June. Now, what we can also do is say, let's do 1, 1, right? And so if we go back to this again, all we're doing is cutting out March. And now in the third place, and also if you notice up here, so start number, delete count number, and I don't know if it's going to, and it doesn't really tell you the specifics that you can also add a third value of this, but so again, start, delete count, delete count item, and you can continue to add additional items in here. All right, and so if I do Feb, right, so notice how March is gone, February's in there. So I think I can do this, will give me in the correct order. Yep, so there's Jan, Feb, March, April, June, and so on and so forth. So we can continue, like, and if I want to do May, I could do another one here. So let's walk this in. So if I start at 0, 1, 2, so I think if I do 2 and I don't delete anything, I can put May in here, or I'm sorry, I would need 3 because it's March, April, May. So 0, 1, 2, 3, start counting, nothing to remove, 1 thing to add, right? February or Jan, Feb, March, May, April. Oops, I did that wrong. There we go. April, May, June. And now same thing if, and so because notice how I'm console.logging down here. If I do this, right? Because we read from top to bottom, I still have Jan, Feb, March, April, June. If I throw another console.log down here, now I should have captured that second one, and there's the whole thing. All right, so, and note, and this is with all of them. So we get an example, then we get syntax. So slice is, you can put nothing in there, you get the whole thing. You can give a where to start, where to stop, right? If start is undefined, slice starts from the 0 index. If start is greater than the index range of the sequence, an empty array is returned. So that means like if there's only 4 elements in your array and you put in say like a start of 10, you've way overshot the size of your array. It just returns an empty array because there's nothing to slice in that range that you gave it. And the end is optional. And let's see here, if end is omitted, slice extracts to the end of the sequence. If end is a greater length of the sequence, slice extracts to the end of the sequence. Let's see, does it say anything about it being inclusive or non-inclusive? Yeah, so I get right here at the top. So a portion of array into a new array object selected from start to end not included. So again, it doesn't specifically say that the start is inclusive, but it does mention that the end is exclusive. All right, so that was slice and splice. Any questions about either of those? And and notice how, I mean, again, I preface this at every class, like I will screw things up. And when I first tried to put man, I put the wrong index value in, right? It doesn't cost me any money. I've been doing this long enough that I don't get embarrassed when I screw up in front of people because it's just going to happen. And so it's not super important that the first time you need to use slice or splice that you get it perfect in your code, right? Like you just knowing that you need to use slice or that you need to use splice or that you need to use one of them and you're not sure which one, and you try one, excuse me, and then you run your code and it's either going to do what you expected it to do or not what you expected it to do. But a lot of times with new developers, they don't want to run their code, right? Like it's almost like not knowing, right? Like if I ignore it, it'll go away. But you should always be running your code and seeing what's happening and expecting that it's not going to be perfect, right? Like I screwed up my index, I run the code, I see where my screw up is, I adjust from there, I hit the run, and now it's correct. And that is it. Developing is just incremental cycles where you're going to do it over and over and over again. Very rarely do you get it right the first time. I mean, I spent my entire afternoon today trying to debug an older piece of software that I'm trying to extend to make it work for some new environments that we're incorporating at work. And I spent 3.5 hours on it, and I'm closer to my solution, but I still don't have a working solution. And I'll probably spend the better part of tomorrow continuing just to kind of bang two rocks together until caveman me can figure it out. And that's perfectly acceptable and is a standard practice when you're writing software. All right. So, and I got away from it, but any questions about splice or slice before I move to these last couple of built-ins? Okay. So next is index of, and we kind of took a look at this yesterday as well. So we can say console.log months.index of, and we can say, we'll say March, right? And what I would expect is that I'm going to get the element March in the array months should have an index of 1. All right, so let's go ahead and hit the button. Nope, index of 2, because I added February. All right, so index of 2 because February is in here now. All right, so 0, 1, 2. I was looking at it up here, and so all this does is tell you. And again, it's pretty easy to count by hand, but I think like one of the code Platoon questions is to like build a nested matrix using arrays. I think like that's one of the hard problems towards the end of the solution, where you basically have to build an array, and nested inside that are a bunch of other arrays, and each of those arrays represent a row and a column in a matrix, right? And so now if you have to do that in a, I mean, 10 by 10, there's 100 items that you have to go through to figure out your index. And now if you're doing it in a like a 100 by 100, now it becomes significantly more difficult to be able to figure out like what the index is of any one specific element. And so that's where index of, if you know that you have a value that you know is in there. And same thing if I do console.log months index of, I think if I put something in there that's not in there, it will give me a -1. Right. And so if I get a -1, that means that it was not found anywhere inside my array, right? So helps you let you know if there's a value in there, where it's at in the array, or if the value is not in there at all. Okay, so join it takes all the elements of the array and puts it into a single string, right? And so in this, I'm going to also demonstrate dot split on a string. So let's do that first. So let's go ahead and come all the way back up here. And we'll grab this. And because I cannot redeclare it, we'll do string to split. All right. And so split is, let's see, do string split dot split. All right, so let's read about split here real quick. So let me know. All right, we'll come back to MD. Split. The split method takes a pattern and divides the string into ordered lists of substrings by searching for the pattern, put these substrings into an array, and returns the array. All right, so again, this isn't going to be something that mutates in place. So if I say string to split and I do this, and then I do console.log string to split. Right, notice how I still get this. But now, if I say, let's do let r of string equals string to split, and I console.log r of string, right? So I gave it basically an empty string, and what that does is it takes every single element in there and it splits it off into its own array, or it splits off an array, and each individual letter is its own element. Now, let's say if I wanted to do it by word, what I could do is this pattern matches. So this is going to take it and because I'm splitting on every space it runs across, it takes it and it gives me an array where each individual word is its own string. Now, the same thing here is I can now take and join. So I can say let assembled string equal r of string dot join. All right, a string used to separate one element of the array from the next in the resulting string. If omitted, the array elements are separated with a comma, adds all elements of an array into a string separated by the specified separator string. Right, so if I don't put anything in here, what I'm going to do, I'm sorry, I need to console.log assembled string. All right, is it took everything and just put it all back together with a comma, which is great if you're trying to build CSV files. If I just put an empty string in here, right, I get it with no spaces. If I'm doing this, right, I'm getting, now I've got my sentence back. Now, where this becomes useful is, let's say I need to go through this string and make the first letter of every word in the string an uppercase letter, right? So then I can split on the space, get every word, go through, grab the string in the 0 index position in each one of these elements and move it to uppercase, and then glue it all back together, and I would have it all back here. One other thing we didn't really talk about, we talked about arrays having index values, but strings also have index values, right? So if I come back up here and I say console.log string to split 0, I'm expecting an uppercase T. Oops, what did I do here? It's not parens, it's bracket notation. Right, there's my uppercase T. If I change it to 1, I should get a lowercase h. All right, there's my lowercase h. So if I go 0, 1, 2, 3, if I change it to 3, I should just get an empty line, but there's a space right there. All right, so I can go through, but if you tell me that with every like that you want every letter or the first letter of every word in here to be uppercase, there's a couple of ways that I could tackle that. I could say, if like create a for loop and basically do string to split I, and if string to split I is an empty space, then the next character should be upcased. Or I could split it, go through it, and then just upcase each letter and then glue it all back together. And there's 2 different ways to tackle it. And off the top of my head, I think the second way would be easier to read and figure out what's going on there. But without having actually done that before, I mean, basically there's more than one way to get all of these things done. So let's see here. So we had just glued it back together. We console.logged it. Okay, so for each in dot map can be confusing. All right, and mdn dot map difference. All right, so for each method executes a provided function once for each element array. All right, so we could say ABC for each console log the element, and what it'll do is it'll output on each separate line the element that we're doing. We can do a console.log, we can do some math, we can concatenate a string, all of these things. The map object holds key value pairs and remembers the original insertion order of the keys. Any value, both objects and primitive values, may be used as either a key or a value. Again, the dot map is going to be, I'm sorry, this is actually looking at map and not dot. That's mdn dot map. There we go. All right. The map method creates a new array populated with the results of calling a provided function on every element in the calling array. Right. So if we look at these, side by side. So the for each method executes a provided function once for each element in an array. The map method creates a new array populated with the results of calling a provided function on every element in an array. So let's go ahead and take a look at these side by side real quick. And I will also, so the main difference between map and for each is that the map method returns a new array by applying the callback function. And I'll show you what a callback function is on each element in the array, while the for each method doesn't return anything. And so let's go ahead and say, so let's do let and so what we can do here is we can say R2 dot for each, and we can say num. And so when I do this fat arrow right here, this is a callback function, right? And so we see it here in the description as well for each, if it pops back up. Callback function. So this is giving me a callback function. And just like when we do a loop, right, and we say something is a specific value in there, this is doing the exact same thing. So we can say this, and let's see here, for each. Okay, so no curly braces unless I go to more than one line. I can say num times 2. All right, so what this should do is go through each element in this array and multiply it times 2. So let's do console.log R2. Now let's see if it modifies it or if it mutates it in place, or if I'll still see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 here. All right, so I still see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now, if I take this and move it in here, oops, because it's not returning anything, that's where I get the undefined. So let's try and say let R3 equal this. So it's still getting undefined. So with the for each, so it doesn't return anything, applies it. You can use the for each method to mutate the source array, but this isn't really the way it's meant to be used. Instead, it's great for when you need to do some action with each element in the array. And so I think where I'm going astray with this is if I do something like this, oops, console.log num. All right, so now I've performed each action on here, and R3 is still nothing, right? So this doesn't get assigned to anything. We just run it and it does an action. And then if we come in here and say R2.map num equal map, and we say num times 2, right? And same thing, so it should not modify it in place. All right, so we still get that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But now if I say let R3 equal that, right? So there now, so for each will allow you to perform an action, but it doesn't return anything out of the function. The dot map will actually give you something that you can save to a variable. And now I've got a new copy of the array with basically the action that I wanted to take in a copy of the original array. And same thing, if I do this inside here, I should get the same thing and I shouldn't get undefined anymore. Right, and so same thing here. All right, and let's see here. And so that was it for the built-in and all of this stuff. So I know that was a lot. Let's see here. Any questions over any of the stuff that we just talked about in class? Nothing? Okay, so what I'm going to do is let me pause the recording. All right, so the next one up on the list is right triangle. And we'll go ahead and remix REPL. Oh, what happened to my fork? Yeah, I guess
mine started doing that today. Yeah, for some reason on all of them it says remix instead of fork.
Yeah, but it still says fork here. That'll get changed next week. All right, no problem. And we're still forking instead of remixing. All right. So this one isn't too terrible. I don't think there's going to be anything new in this, but we need to apply a formula here. So we want to write a function that returns the area of a right triangle given a base and a height. The area formula is A equals 1/2 times base times height. All right, so if I take a look here, when I look at this function, I know that I'm going to have two inputs, base and height, and both are numbers. All right, and then I'm going to have one output, also a number. All right, so, and I talked to a couple of people about this today. So when we write a function and we are returning a value out of it, we are returning the actual value. We're not returning true or false out of here unless we're specifically returning true or false. The reason we're seeing true or false being logged to the console is because we're adding the strict equals in here. And what that does when we add the strict equals is instead of console.logging the value of this and the value of this, we're console.logging the value of these two things resolving through this logic operator. And so what happens is that gets turned into a Boolean and we get either a true or false value. If I were to delete this, then instead of getting true or false, I will get the actual number that is returned from the function here. All right, so we're going to go ahead and take our first steps and just make sure, excuse me, that we're seeing what we expect to be seeing. So I'm going to take my base and my height, and I'm going to console log both. All right, so I don't care that I'm failing, but I see my 2, 2 and my 1, 1. All right, and I'm just going to grab this. Drop this in here. And we'll clean this up. Whoops, what did I do? Probably because I don't need this. Base, height, and then I also wonder if it does not like the text. It does not. 6-point asterisk instead of a 5-point asterisk. All right, and there's my true. And so I can delete this out of here. And again, if I get rid of this, right, now I'm actually returning the value out of here, which is 2. And the same thing if I took 10 and 17. right? I get 8.5. But when I have this in here, it's basically going to resolve what's happening here. And I know we talked a little bit about this, but I just want to make sure that like we draw like a clear path here. So I'm going to take this, and I'm going to show you guys a new website here. This is called pythontutor.com. And you can use it to visualize your code. It's basically running a debugger, something similar to what you'd see in VS Code, but it's just on a web page, and it's a little bit easier to use. And we'll do this first. And there's a couple of different languages, so you can do Python 3, Java, JavaScript, C, C++. It looks like they removed these ones. So we'll run this as JavaScript. So we're going to click the button, and it's going to visualize my execution. And there's basically 3 steps to this. So we're going to do here. And what this does is, so when we see this, right, we see base and height, these variables, what the computer sees is that these numbers, right? And so there's the return value. That's all there is. This one's not super exciting. Now I'll start throwing more and more of the challenges in here, and we can take a look at it, how it handles things step by step. This is also great, especially when you're looping. If you're not getting what you expect out of your loop, it's great to throw it in here because it'll display each loop. But what is actually happening here with this is, we'll do a multi-line note here. Is so when I say function, right, triangle, base height, right, and then I call my function, is what's happening here is this, right? And technically, I could write a function that does this. But now it doesn't matter what numbers I put in here every time, or basically don't put anything in here and just put 2 and 2. But then if I want to change it and do different numbers, I've got to come back in and swap these up. So when we do this, this is called hard coding, right? Like I've hard coded values in here. Hard coding 1/2 is great because that is never going to change. Like that's how we calculate the area of a triangle. And we're just removing the variables out, and we're hard coding the values. So, but what the computer sees is this. And then this. And then this, right? And then when we do something like this, right? All of the steps up above happen. And then before we console.log, this basically turns into this, right? And then after that, it turns into this, right? And so, and that's why we see true over here, is all of this happens behind the scenes. It all resolves down to one value here. And if we were to do without this, so if we do something like this, right? This basically just resolves into that. And then the 2 gets console sent to the console for logging, right? And so when we do this, we have to, in our minds, take these values, put them up here, and then kind of walk through in our head or as we jot and make notes that this isn't really base and height anymore, it's 2 and 2. And we're doing the multiplication with 2 and 2 and 1/2. Right? And hopefully that helps a little bit with kind of like the invisible order of operations. All right. And so any questions on this or like how I explained any of this? Okay. So next challenge. I think we'll skip. Actually, this is the first time we're looping, so we won't skip this one. This one isn't crazy difficult. So what we'll do here is take a look at this one. We'll talk about it in class, and I'll split everyone up for this one. And like I said, we'll shoot for groups of 2 or 3 on this one, and I'll probably give everyone about 15 or so minutes to take a crack at it. And so we're going to write a function that takes an integer as seconds and prints how many seconds there are until liftoff. And once there are 0 seconds left, have it return liftoff. No, let's see here. No, they never fixed this. So my caveat with this is that instead of returning there are 1 seconds left, when you do your countdown, I want it to say there is 1 second left until liftoff. So we're going to use appropriate grammar here. Right. So there's no specific test or anything like that. I'm going to give you the link to it. And I'm going to start up the breakout rooms. And what I would ask again is that as you go to the breakout rooms, just make sure that one person is sharing their screen so that you're working together. It's not just 3 people sitting in the breakout room, sitting in silence. But like I said, I'll give everyone, I'll get the breakout room set up and I'll give you a time that we're going to come back. This one shouldn't be super difficult. You should be able to leverage some of the tricks that we went over with the convert hours and minutes to help you use the correct grammar when you do your countdown. And so let me go ahead and any questions before I send everyone to the breakout rooms. All right, well, welcome back from the breakout rooms. And so we did the SpaceX countdown and it sounded like everyone pretty much got the general gist of it. Maybe there was a couple of issues around the twist that I threw in there saying that I want everyone to use appropriate grammar, right? So there is 1 second left until liftoff. So let's go ahead and take a look at this. Let's remix this REPL. I'm going to have so much more fun saying that than forking the REPL. Okay. So let's look at this systematically, right? So I've got 1 input and that is a number, right? And I'm also going to have 1 output and that is going to be a string. I need to take the number of seconds and create a countdown that decrements by 1 until I run out of time, and then I say blast off. I also need to account for appropriate grammar when I only have 1 second remaining. All right. So like I said, let's go ahead and take a look at this, and we're going to do this step by step. We're going to get something as close as we can, and then we're going to continue to improve on it until we get the answer that we're looking for. So let's go ahead and say console.log countdown, and we'll just do a 10-second countdown. All right, and I want to make sure that I have my that I'm getting my parameter here, my input. So I'm going to just do a console.log seconds. All right, so there's 10, and because I'm not returning anything out of here, that's why I see the undefined as well. All right, so I know I'm getting my seconds. All right, and I know I need to return something here. So actually, I'm sorry, I don't specifically need to return anything. I don't know if it said write a function. Okay, so it looks like integer second prints how many seconds are into liftoff, and once there's it will return liftoff. Okay, so I do need to mute everyone here. We're going to return liftoff. And I know that that's going to be the last thing that my function does. So now if I do this, I should see liftoff. All right, so I'm already 1/10 of the way there. So when I know that I need to do something over and over again, I need to concatenate a string with a integer that represents how many seconds I have left over and over again. What building block do I want to use to take care of that?
String literal?
Well, a string literal is what I'm going to be logging, but what building block am I going to be using to iterate through my seconds?
Or a loop that decrements.
Yep, I need a loop that decrements. And there's a couple of different ways to do this. We can do a while loop and then decrement seconds each way. We could do a for loop and decrement seconds that way. I think I'll start with a while loop here. Let's see here. So if I say while seconds are greater than 0, and I want to do console.log. And now this is where my string literal is going to come in. So what is my message? So we'll just take this and we'll copy this over here. We'll get rid of this. And instead of leaving a hard-coded value 5 here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give my $sign in my curly braces. And let's do this as seconds. Now, because I don't have my decrementing counter up in my for loop, like a for loop on my while loop, I still need to be able to account for decrementing seconds. So I need to do seconds, and I can do minus equals 1, or I can just do minus minus, I believe should work. But let's go ahead and take a look at this and see what happens. All right, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Liftoff, do they say 0? Okay, so they do say 0. So what we can do is we can say while seconds is greater or equal to 0, right? Now there are 0 seconds left until liftoff, right? So notice how, again, this doesn't get me exactly what I want, right? And maybe I need to do greater than or equals to, but it doesn't cost me anything extra to run it as greater than. See what I get, just click that button. Same thing with this. I didn't know if I could even do this, or if I have to do minus equals 1 should get me the same thing, right? And then I just do, okay, didn't give me exactly what I wanted, so I'll add that equals in there. All right, that's looking better. Okay, so now what we can do is work. So we're pretty much there. The only thing we need to do is tackle this edge case for liftoff. And what we'll do here is, does anyone want to take a stab at how I can handle this?
Maybe a else if.
We could do a if or else if. How did I handle it yesterday
With the ternary.
with the ternary, right? So let's take a look at doing that. So let's say let seconds text equal seconds triple equal to 1 if true, second, if false, seconds, right? And now I can take this and so let's go ahead and run this again. All right, there are 2 seconds left. There are 1 second left. Okay, so we solved part of it. Now we just need to take care of is, and we've already built the pattern, so we could do something like this, right? And we could say there is 1 second left, or there are multiple seconds left, or 0 seconds left. And we could just call this is or are, right? And then right here, and we can do something like this, right? Now there are 2 seconds left. There is 1 second left. There are 0 seconds left, right? And so all we're doing is we're asking the computer to make a decision. So instead of just printing the same thing out every time, we're saying, hey, make a decision for me. If you get this data, give me these 2 things. And if it's not equal to this, give me these 2 things. And then we're doing this, we're making it dynamic. We can keep adding in more and more rules. But this is how I would tackle this one. Is that how, I mean, seeing it a second time, does that make it a little bit clearer?
Yeah, that actually explains a lot.
Okay, cool. So that is the SpaceX countdown. So what I'm going to do is it is 8 o'clock right now. So I am going to have, so these are a little bit out of order. The next one is remove zeros, and then there's alphabet code. Remove zeros is a little bit harder than alphabet code. So I'm going to have you do alphabet code as breakout groups again. And I will, I think I can shuffle everyone here. If everything goes crazy when I click this button, I apologize. Okay, cool. Not everything went crazy. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at alphabet code, and then I'm going to send you into the breakout rooms. And I'm probably going to give you about 25 minutes to work on this one. It's a little bit trickier. Well, probably closer to 20 minutes just for time. And then when we come back, I'll go over it again, just like we did with this. And then for the last challenge of the night, I'm going to do remove zeros in front of the class. Does that sound good to everyone?
Yeah, it works for me.
Cool. All right, so let's go ahead and pull up alphabet code. And let's show files. I'm going to drop this into the Slack, or not Slack, excuse me, into the chat. All right. Write a method that takes in an uppercase letter of the alphabet as a string and returns the integer corresponding to its place in the alphabet. Right? So if you do A, it would be 1. B would return 2, and Z would return 26. All right, so no specific tests in here, but remember, you'll want to remix the REPL. All right, so just at the bottom, we'll do console.log, alphabet code, and then give it an uppercase letter. And what I'd say is just copy like 3 or 4 of them. Right, and then we're good from here. So we know we've got 1 string coming in, and we need to return a number or an integer. There's going to be a couple of different ways that you can tackle this, but either way that you tackle it, well, off the top of my head, there's three different ways that I could look at tackling this. And each one of them is a little bit different. All of them are going to be valid solutions, and we'll try and touch on all of them when we get back into class. So I'm going to pause the share or pause the recording. Go. All right, welcome back from the breakout room. So we're going to take a look at some solutions for alphabet code. While you guys were working on yours, I was also working on mine. So I solved it 3 different ways, and I'm going to kind of start with, this is not like the worst way or the best way, but this way was definitely the most overhead. So basically I created an object, right? So comma separated, key value pair. One of the nice things about this is that I don't need to do any math. For some of you that may have solved with an array, you'll notice that because again, computers start counting from 0, and we want to know the number. So A is not the 0th letter in the alphabet, it's the first letter in the alphabet. So you have to adjust there. With this, we're basically just taking a letter, passing it in. I created an object that has all the key value pairs, and then I'm just retrieving the value by using the key, which is the letter, right? So if I run this, so with object 1, 4, 26, 24, right? So that looks right to everyone. Cool. So let me just comment these out here real quick, and then let's move up here. And the other way that I solved it is with an array, right? And this is another way that probably the first time I ever solved this problem. This is probably how I solved this problem, right? Because I think like, oh, you know, the letters are stored in sequential order. It's not as much overhead as an object. So what I can do is just take all of my letters and put them in alphabetical order, each as an individual element. And then I'm going to return the array with an index of, so I'm looking for the index of the letter. But if I just do index of, right, I get 0, 3, 25, 23. That's not correct, it's off by 1. So I just need to add 1 to each of my answers here. Now, lastly, the one with the least amount of overhead, and also it's a shortcut for this one, is I did solve it with a string. Right, so this is the least amount of code, it's the least amount of typing, and it's the exact same thing as an array because indexes or strings have index positions as well, right? We talked about that earlier in class tonight. So all I have to do is do string index of letter plus 1, right? And so then I get with a string, I get the exact same answers. Now, another handy dandy way to cheat, if I were to do this with an array, is I can say console.log string.split like this, run this, grab this from my console, delete this, and then come down here and paste this. And if you notice, that looks very similar. So instead of having to type A comma space, B comma space, C comma space, right? We want the computer to do as much lifting as possible for us. All right, so let me go ahead and do some of this. And with the three different ways that I solved that, did all of those make sense to everyone? Cool.
Yes.
All right. Like I said, I'll pass that along here at the end, but that's three different ways with the least amount of work to arguably the most amount of work. All right. And also the same thing. So just like I cheated with this to get from here to here, another thing you can do is like if I did when I wanted to turn this into an object, remember Control D or Command D is multi-select and gets everything except for the Z, but I've got it based off all the commas, hit back, hit colon, hit space, right? And get out of the multi-select and I can do 1, 2, 3, and so on. And again, it's not an array, it's an object. So I need to change my braces here, but then go through that way, right? And so there's always our tools can help us take shortcuts and make our lives easier for us. So, all right, and so that's it for that one. And let me grab this one. And this is going to be remove zeros. And so let's go ahead and remix that replit. All right. Close the breakout panels because we're done with those for the evening. All right. Any questions? Okay, no questions in the chat. All right. So with the remove zeros here, let's take a look. Write a function that returns a number with all of the zeros removed from it. Right. So remove 0, 1. Basically 001 should return as 11. 5068 0019 should be returned as 56,819. So we're just popping the zeros out. All right. So we're going to have, oh, sorry. One input, a number, and we're going to have one output, which is also a number. Right. So when I look at this, I'm going to get a number with 0, 1, or that has, I'm going to get a number that needs to have all the zeros removed. I want to take that number and so, and I'll demonstrate this, but if we do something like this, so let num equal this, and I wrap this and I say dot split, right? Type error. Split is not a function at object. So, and if I go back over here and I do MDN number, right, and I go through here and I'll flip. So, you know, we've got all the properties, max value, min value methods, is finite, is integer, is not a number, is safe integer, parse float, parse int, exponential fixed. Like there's nothing in here that really helps me do what I need to do, right? And so when if I do to split, because I know I want to split this up, I need to get at each individual number, right? And I do that, it says, well, that belongs to string, and there is no split on number. So that tells me, I always get like a billion tabs. I think I told everyone like the first or second night, you're going to have more tabs open as a software developer than you thought your computer could handle. So I want to take that number and split it, or so I basically want to iterate through the number and isolate each digit. To do that, I will need to convert the number to a string. I will need to then parse or iterate through the string or convert it to an array. I can then compare the number, compare the number and identify if it is 0 or 0. Remove it if once done, I will then need to change my new string with no zeros in it back to a number for my final answer. All right, I believe I need to. Let's read this again. So write a function that returns a number. So it's not returning a string that looks like a number. I need to return a number with all of the zeros removed. All right, so let's take a look at this. So I'm going to delete this and let's go ahead and say console.log remove zeros. And we'll do 1 0 2 0 3 0 4. All right, and what I would expect is I'll do this. Right, because while I'm doing this, I kind of want to see what I've got going on at each incremental step. So let's go ahead and return number. And before I dive into this, are there any questions on kind of how I described like the steps that I'm going to try and attack this in?
Can you just sum it up just once more? I know you have it typed out there, but.
Yeah, so I know that I cannot iterate through a number, right? So I cannot loop through a number. I cannot map through it or do a dot each. I can do that through a string or an array. So I'm going to have to convert my number into something that I can iterate through, right? And because like in a number, these numbers represent more than an index position, right? Because this is a completely different value than this. So that's why there's no index values and I can't iterate through them. So I'm going to need to convert this into something that I can iterate through. And then I can start to basically examine each digit or each element on their own. And at that point, I can identify if it is a 0 or if it is something other than 0. And if it is something other than 0, there's no action that I need to take. I just skip over it. But if it's 0, then I will have to take some sort of action to delete it. And then once I'm done iterating through everything, I have to glue everything back together as a new number with no zeros in it and then return my final number. Right. So there's going to be some type conversion, and then there's going to be some manipulation, and then there's going to be another type conversion. Right. So we're going to go from number to string or array, do our magic, and then go back to number and then return our number. All right. So we do return number, console.log remove zeros.
So I think your function call has an E and your function name does not.
Sure does. I just Dan quailed it. All right. Potatoes. All right. So 1 0 2 0 3 0 4. It is golden, which tells me that I'm returning a number. So let's go ahead and start working with what we've got going on here. So let's go ahead and change this over from a number to a string. So let's say let string equal number dot to string. And let's go ahead and return string. Right. So now it turned white. So we're dealing with a string instead of a number. So now that I have done this, I can iterate, right? Because as we just learned with the last one, strings have index positions just like arrays do. I would probably at one point have broken this into an array, and maybe I'll run into a jam where I can't figure this out with a string and it's easier for me to conceptualize it as an array, but I'm going to try and make a go of it as an array. But let's say if I did want an array, all I have to do is str.split on an empty string. And if we return the array, right, so there's my array of strings that can then be also iterated through and looked at if it is a number or not. All right, but for right now, I'm going to hold off on this. I don't need it as of yet. So let's go ahead and take a look. We're back to string. All right, so I know I want to iterate. So let's go ahead and we'll do for let I equal 0, I less than str.length. And then I plus plus. All right, so now we can do console.log stri. So we're taking our string and we're accessing each character by its index position, which is going to start at the 0 index and then increment up through 1 less than the length, which will be the last index position. So there we go, 1 0 2 3 2 0 3 0 4. All right, so what comes next now that we're in our loop? I've isolated each individual number, so what can I do now?
If else.
Yep, so
now
so now I could do an if else statement. All right, so we could say if, and I don't really need a else at this point. I can say if str I is triple equal to 0. So remember, we're using a string right now. I can say str I, and we're going to assign. So this isn't a quality anymore. This is assignment, and we'll just turn it into an empty string. All right. And so now what we can do is, see here, this is in the if, this is still in the for. Let's go ahead and take this out of the for loop. And let's see what string looks like now that we've, string I equals that. I think that'll assign it. Okay, so I didn't do anything there. So string I equals a empty string. 1, 2, string I equals an empty string. My guess is I'm not hitting this. So let's take a look at string I triple equals 0. And let's go ahead and console.log this. All right. So what I've done, and silly me, is, well, actually, no. So that's what I'm expecting, right? I'm hitting that true. So I'm going into my if statement. So I want to assign a character in a string, a new value in place. That is going to be Java. So let's redo this with JavaScript. How do I replace a character at a particular index in JavaScript? So it looks like we have a replace at function, function index replacement. Return this substring 0 index plus replacement plus this substring index replacement dot length. That seems like a lot of work for what we're trying to do. Return, yeah, using substring 0 index. So what I would probably do here, right? So set char at, this looks a little bit better. Let's see if I have this built in. Doesn't look like that is going to allow me to do that. So basically, I think there are some solutions in here. So there's substring. I can use a built-in 0 index plus X plus some, like, this seems a little bit complicated. So what I would probably do at this point is probably backpedal a little bit. And let's see what happens when we actually do this inside of our array, right? So now I can say, we'll change this over to R. And we'll say number to string dot split on every character. And so notice how I am chaining my methods together. So instead of doing it in 2 separate actions, I'm still doing it in 2 separate actions, but I can put it on the same line. And I'll need to do this. R dot length, and then R I, and then this will be and I'm not sure if I'll be able to do direct assignment here as well. But if not, I know that at this point I have things like splice that I can use, or to start removing something at a specific index and then pulling it out. So let's see what happens when I do this. And I'm going to console.log R here. How about R instead of R? Right. So now I've got the empty strings that I was looking for, right? So now I've got 1, 2, 3, and 4. And what I have to do now, though, is because if, let's see here, if I go and do join, maybe I don't have to do anything extra. See when we do this. So there's my 1, 2, 3, 4, and I'm getting an error because there's no string to return. Right. And then I can also do this. And there's no floating here, so I can do parse int. Right. And now that looks like a number to me. Right, without any zeros in it. So what I can do is let's go ahead and get rid of the console.log. And there's different ways to do this. So I could say str is to string, and then let r equal str dot split, right? And then coming back this way, I could do let new str equal r dot join, and we'll join on that. Right? And then we'll say let new num equal parse int new string, and then we can return new num. Right. And so now when I do this, right? I get a golden 1, 2, 3, 4. If I come back over here and I do my equality check now, my strictly equal check. On that, I get true. And so now that I've done this, I could take a look at going ahead and cleaning this up a little bit, right? So I don't really need string here, right? So I could just say, change this back and say number to string split, get rid of this altogether. And then same thing down here. I could just return our dot join. Let me actually do this. So, so let's go ahead and clean this up. So again, we'll do this. Number.string.split. Come down here and we'll just do you here. You here. Delete this. Now, I probably could, like, I'm okay with this with my for loop, and I could get a little experimental here. So I could do this. So let's say dot, and this, I think I'm happy with this solution because this is readable. And I can make this, I think I can make this more condensed, but at the cost of making it harder to understand. Right. So I could say dot map num to check, or actually, I guess it would be element to check. And then say this. So if element to check is triple equal to string 0, you would then say element to check is equal to an empty string. So let's see what happens with this. Type error cannot read property split of undefined at remove zeros. Number, sorry, because I've still got string in here. Number.split is not a function. I'm sorry, I went the wrong direction. This needs to be to string dot split. So that's false. So let's go ahead and get rid of this for a second and see what we're getting. So I'm getting not a number. All right. So let's see here. Let's go ahead and console.log. Let's look at the whole thing first. Let's do console.log R. So I'm getting a bunch of undefined here. So let's see here. Element. And so here's something where I wrote too many lines of code before I ran it, and so now I'm having to uncomment a bunch of stuff to undo it. So let's go ahead and take a look at element to check. All right, so there's my numbers. And let's see there. Element to check. And so if we do this, and instead of this, we say console.log true. So there's my trues. And I'm still getting undefines here because I've got array. Our number string split. Map element to check. If element to check is triple equals 0, we got that. Got. So I'm not entirely sure why I'm getting everything as undefined in here. It probably has something to do with the way that I'm using .map. So let's if map. So I believe my .map is that's why is because I'm making a copy of something. So I think what I would have to do here is say I can't do this all in the same thing. I believe I would have to say let R2 equal r.map. And if we take a console.log of R2, no, it's still undefined. Yeah, so I'm kind of at a dead end at this one. So, and I honestly, I don't know if I can do this. I haven't tried this in any of the other classes. And like I said, I would be happy with where we were at with everything I did up to adding the like trying to do this in a .map. So I'm going to call it here because we've only got about 4 minutes left. I'll play around with this a little bit, and if I can do it, I'll show it on Monday at this after Greg speaks at the start of class, and we'll go from there. But like I said, I mean, a lot of this, and I kind of broke my own rules. I wrote too many lines of code without writing what was going on, or without running and figuring out what was going on. But you can see, like, something happens, I start backpedaling one step at a time until I'm at a point where I have working code, and then I start trying to work forward again from there. Quite honestly, like I said, I don't know if this is even possible to complete or not with a .map, but I'll take a look at it. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording for right now. And then if anyone's got any